Ever wonder why you sometimes see flickering lights in videos? Today's video is about frame rates and what kind of frame rates you should film in depending on what kind of region that you're in. Depending on where you are in the world, you should film in different frame rates. There's two kind of regions that you should know about. That's NTSC and PAL. NTSC is the standard broadcasting format in North America and parts of South America. PAL is the standard broadcasting format in Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia. Power grids in PAL regions are running at a refresh rate of 50 Hz, and power grids in NTSC regions, they are running at a refresh rate of 60 Hz. And you should film with frame rates that match the refresh rate of the power grid of the region that you're in. So for PAL regions where the refresh rate is 50 Hz, you should film in 25, 50 or 100 frames per second. And for NTSC regions where the refresh rate is 60 Hz, you should film in 24, 30, 60 or 120 frames per second. But this only applies if you're using light sources like electrical lights that's connected to the power grid. If you film something and your camera is set to NTSC, but you're in a PAL region and you're using a light source that's connected to that power grid, and you're filming in 24, 30, 60 or 120 frames per second, you will experience flickering in your footage. Flickering like this. And that's because the frame rates doesn't match up with the frequency of your light source. But if you switch the camera over to PAL region and you film in 25, 50 or 100 frames per second, you will not experience this kind of flickering. Now, if you're filming outside and you're using the sun as light source, it doesn't matter what kind of region that you set your camera in, and you can choose whatever kind of frame rates that you want. And you will not experience flickering in that footage. But no matter what kind of settings you have your camera in, what's super important is that when you open a project in your editing software, it's important that your timeline is set at the same frame rate that your A-roll was filmed in. So if you film something in 25 frames per second, you need to make sure that your timeline is also set at 25 frames per second. It's also important that if you choose to film something in PAL mode or set the camera to PAL region and choose to film something in 25 or 50 or 100 frames per second, it's important that you continue shooting everything in that PAL region. Because if you film something in 25 frames per second and then you film something in 30 frames per second and something in 24 frames per second, you will experience some jittery footage depending on what kind of timeline that you're editing in. And you might also experience that your voice or the voice of the people that you have recorded, that their voices might be out of pitch. Their voices might sound too high. Now, to the average person out there filming homemade videos for their families, all this might not matter at all. But if you're shooting professional footage for clients, this should be something that you pay good attention to. Now, to switch between NTSC and PAL, you should find this under the region settings on your camera. If you set your camera to PAL region, you only get to choose from those kind of frame rates, which is 25, 50 and 100 frames per second. And the same applies for NTSC. If you put your camera in NTSC mode, you can only choose between 24, 30, 60 and 120 frames per second. Now, where you might meet some trouble is that if you're filming something with your mirrorless camera and then you want to film something with your phone or a action camera like a GoPro, the action camera or GoPro and your iPhone or Android phone, they are probably just set to NTSC region. So you don't have the option to choose the frame rates that comes in a PAL region. So if you live in Europe and you film something with your mirrorless camera and the camera is set to PAL region, and then you want to shoot something with your GoPro, but your GoPro is only at NTSC, so you only have 24 frames per second to choose from, you might end up with something like this. Yep, so I totally forgot my shirt. So now we gotta go out and try to find a new one. So, to recap the trip. Nice trip. Sorry my wife couldn't come along. Had a blast last night. Now, this was from a vlog that I shot over a year ago. I shot the vlog with my Canon M6 Mark II set at PAL region and filmed with 25 frames per second. But the second clip that you saw was filmed with the GoPro, and the GoPro only had 24 frames per second. And did you notice something about my voice? In the GoPro footage, my voice sounded a bit higher than in the other footage. Yep, so I totally forgot my shirt. So now we gotta go out and try to find a new one. So, to recap the trip. Nice trip. Sorry my wife couldn't come along. Had a blast last night. And the whole thing was edited on a 25 frames per second timeline. So putting in a clip that's filmed with 24 frames per second in a 25 frames per second timeline makes it so that my voice sounded a bit higher than it actually is. No matter what kind of frame rates you choose to film in, the 180-degree rule says that your shutter speed should always be the double of your frame rates. So let's say you choose to shoot in 25 frames per second. Then your shutter speed should always be the double of that, and that's 1/50th of a second. Now, if you choose to film with 50 frames per second, you should double that, and your shutter speed should be 1/100 of a second. And if you choose to film in 100 frames per second, you should double that, and your shutter speed should be 1/200 of a second. Now, if we go over to NTSC, the same goes here. So let's say you shoot in 60 frames per second, then your shutter speed should be 1/120th of a second. If you choose to film in 120 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/240th of a second. Now, the cameras don't have 1/240th of a second. The cameras only have 1/250th of a second. And when we talk about the differences between NTSC and PAL, if you're outside filming something and you're filming in low light situations, set your camera to PAL mode, because then you get a lower shutter speed and you let more light into your camera. That means that you can avoid noise in the shadows of your footage. Just a tip. If you have any questions or any comments at all, please leave them in the comment section down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you feel like that, it would be highly appreciated. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers now, and like I said in a previous video, when we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to do a giveaway on an accessory to the Canon M6 Mark II. So if you want to be a part of that, subscribe, don't miss any new uploads, and maybe you can be a part of that giveaway. So that's it for me this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Maybe I will see you in another video. Bye.